When I filmed the process of this illustration, I intended for it to be a quiet ASMR type video. I had been enjoying many videos of a similar theme at the time, and wanted to try my hand at making one myself. Of course, there were, and remain, many things I wanted to try for myself. Soft, serious painting videos were fun to watch when I didn't need my eyes too urgently, but process videos and vlogs with a fun and quirky narrator were what I soon deviated to. I hadn't really considered myself prone to parasociality before, but as 2020 rolled over into 2021, I realized that I'd started to frame my concept of artistic identity against the cultivated personae I was turning to for inspiration and comfort online. Very rarely do I see discussions of artistic identity, or perhaps self-conception as a whole, discussed in the ways I needed then, and probably still need now. My childhood life had been strict, and I was discouraged by parents and teachers from becoming involved in any kind of online community, both for fear of my safety and because they considered it frivolous and time-wasting. While a few understood that the internet was a valuable source of inspiration and education, none encouraged me to pursue online success in place of real success. Online friendships, of course, were seen as almost unilaterally dishonest and probably predatory. By the time I was a bold enough teen to sneak around these restrictions, many of the online spaces of the new internet had already widely dispersed. I had been grudgingly allowed a DeviantArt account as a younger teen, but never allowed to socialize. Tumblr became my teenage internet playground, and I stuck mostly to insular fan communities, making fan art and fics, but never amassing a large following or trying to make friends outside those interests. As was heavily drilled into my mind, the art and fun I had online was my frivolous downtime, while the art I made for my AP art classes was serious, and should aim always for professionalism. I was, of course, never to show anime art to any recruiters or potential clients. Unbeknownst to me, Instagram, a site I was made to believe was just for silly little girls posting their silly little Starbucks selfies, was growing into a hub for rising artists. Popular Tumblr and Instagram artists were quietly befriending each other, and I would find in the coming decade that many of them had met and begun collaborating through the days of posting 6-megapixel sketchbook pictures with a sunset filter. At 17, I went to college. I picked the only school I could halfway afford to dorm in, desperate for freedom that had been promised to me once high school ended. It was not, in retrospect, a good choice. The school I went to was the only public school with an illustration program in my state, and so was where those of us too poor or unmotivated for the nicer schools wound up. My professors, 90% over the age of 50, looked down on digital art, at the time my preferred medium, and encouraged us to avoid becoming hyper-specialized internet artists, who, by their reckoning, would never hack it in the real world. The real art world involved reaching out to art directors and agents, sometimes by email, but often by mail and postcards. It involved real leather portfolio cases and hitting the pavement. It certainly didn't matter what your Twitter following was. The first time that I discovered that Instagram was important was when I began trying to find a tattoo artist. I had been waiting my whole life for a tattoo, and as my 18th birthday approached, I scoured Google for styles and artists. I quickly learned that Instagram, to my surprise, was the place to find good tattoos by the thousands, in styles I had never heard of before. Near the end of my second and what would be my last year of school, a younger professor asked the artist tattooing his bodysuit to apprentice him, and became the oldest tattoo apprentice I've yet met. A man in his late 30s doing a traditional tattoo apprenticeship is rare, as many in the industry know that only naive 20-somethings are willing to put up with the grueling unpaid work and abusive hazing of being the shop bitch for 1 to 3 years. The few men who decide they want to learn in their 30s and 40s usually sneak sideways into the industry, having a buddy teach them on the down low while they fill extraneous and less abused positions like shop manager, which is functionally shop bitch but treated nicer, or sometimes even deeply unqualified piercer. Yet here was my professor, learning the traditional and honorable way, and his descriptions of his experiences convinced me that I too could learn to tattoo. I dedicated those last few months in school to preparing my portfolio to hunt for shops. A tattoo apprentice portfolio, I was told, must have no to minimal artistic identity. That, the logic went, you earned the right to later, and was to cover as broad a range of styles and skills as physically possible. This meshed well with what I had already learned, that versatility as an artist was paramount, and any style that came with it must be carefully examined and discarded the second it presented a limit on what you could do. New young artists must be able to do everything, these seasoned professionals told me. Only with a few years of experience could you begin to narrow your scope. And so, off I went, making everything I could, trying to prove I could do it all. I got a tattoo apprenticeship later that summer. It could have, especially by the standards of old-style apprenticeships, been much worse. It was still awful. Tattoo apprenticeships have only within the past few years started to approach being ethical, though we have a long way to go on that front. At that apprenticeship, I learned more about the industry, gave names to the kind of styles I wanted to emulate, neo-traditional and black work, and adapted my work to suit them. These styles are some of the broader and more versatile in the tattoo world, encompassing a wide, though wider today than back in 2015, variety of aesthetics. So I figured they would be safe styles to pursue while still retaining that all-important adaptability. New tattooers, especially then, are made very aware that they will have to earn the right to say no to projects, so you better get good at everything and quick if you want to make it. So I learned script and geometry, American traditional, and some scraps of Japanese, black and gray realism, although at least I had a lot of experience rendering realistically in pencil and charcoal to help me there. From the messy end of that apprenticeship after a year to a series of street shops, the kind of shops that take anyone off the street and, because their earnings are based on percentage, strongly discouraged any of their artists from losing any sales. The artists who did well and were booked out with all the tattoos they wanted had notable styles. The rest of us got what we could, trying to eke out enough of a living to be able to be pickier, to give discounted rates on the pieces we really wanted to do, to maybe, hopefully, make it out of there, and to shops with better reputations and established styles, where the clientele would treat us as real artists and not overpriced copy machines obligated to say yes to whatever they asked, despite the fact that we were ostensibly independent contractors. I eventually found myself in a street shop with a more relaxed owner, where I was freer to choose my projects and clients as I wished, and I began to develop more confidence and refine my skills, but I was growing increasingly frustrated at my lack of an art style. All the artists I admired had one. Why else would I admire them if not for it? My loved ones assured me that they could see me, my personality and individual flair in my work, but it wasn't enough. A close loved one can see you in most things, but an audience needs to see themselves in your work, needs to find your style universal and relatable in some way. I would cycle through media and inspiration monthly. Did I want to be a pop surrealist oil painter, or a delicate natural history illustrator, or a bold, dark horror artist? My tattoo flash reflected that. I have hundreds of pieces, mostly unclaimed, languishing in my old art folder, reflecting my many fumbling grabs for a style. The problem, I was learning, was that when you're making just barely enough to survive, you are constantly, always thinking about work. And when work is not just in the office, as it were, but in your DMs and personal sketchbook and impromptu consultations at a bar, then work becomes your whole life. Every time I would try to work on art outside of tattooing, in would slither the voice of capitalism to demand, "Yeah, but will this get me appointments? Enough to fill the month? Enough for next month's rent?" By the time I was 2-3 pieces into my new thing, I would become overcome with guilt at not doing enough for tattooing. This was especially egregious when I was also drawing my appointments ahead of time, a practice I have since forsaken in favor of freehanding my Sharpie stencil directly onto my clients. After all, I may have lofty goals for galleries or residencies or book deals, but tattooing is paying my bills now, and I owe it my attention. And so I would slip back into tat mode, and by the time I revisited my fledgling portfolio some months later, I would hate absolutely everything in it. So it goes, on to the next thing. In late winter of 2020, I suddenly stopped having tattoos to do. Panicked about what I was going to make of myself, My other marketable skill, dog training, was similarly an in-person client-based profession unsuitable for quarantine times. I dove into art with a fervor I hadn't had since high school, but with less of a sense of fun. Gone were my Tumblr fandom doodles in between 2 finished illustrations a week. Although much more technically skilled now than I'd been a decade before, I felt slow, desperate, uninspired. A friend and animation producer contacted me for last-minute help on a celebrity music video, and soon I had at least semi-regular gigs doing digital art for people in the music industry. What I learned from these gigs was that my dedication to versatility had indeed been a double-edged sword. Record labels, always reputable for their stalwart morality and dedication to workers' rights, do not, it turns out, pay well. I quickly discovered my utility was as a largely uncredited art drone who could replicate a wide variety of styles with quality and speed. There's a running saying, cheap, quick, and good. In any service, you get to pick 2. But I badly needed work, so to my increasing resentment, they got all 3. More tourists through the door of the shop, wanting the closest thing to a human printer they could get so long as they didn't have to know your name or pay above the shop minimum. My gratitude for the work quickly gave way to resentment for these stingy millionaires and their endless barrage of just one more last-minute edits, paying rates that wound up being far below minimum wage. What these jobs did provide, however, was a certain kind of mental respite. After a week or so of flailing to meet deadlines, I would be paid and done until the next one came along. No need to think of Flash or client DMs anymore. I could focus entirely on my personal projects. Now I could move through my phases so much more efficiently. Oils, acrylics, gouache, and graphite were all toyed with and summarily discarded. On my birthday that year, my spouse gifted me a set of Faber-Castell colored pencils, which I had been eyeing but couldn't bring myself to drop the money for, not knowing when my next project would come along. I had already been toying with the few colored pencils in my possession after a last-minute whirlwind move to reunite with my then-fiancé, now spouse, had left me without most of my art supplies. I had been forced to bring only my bare essentials, easily portable and capable of either squeezing into my suitcase or making it through customs, an odyssey which my oldest X-Acto blade did not survive. Now, I had just some microns, a few pencils, a water brush, and a travel palette of watercolor I'd had for close to a decade. In trying to keep my mind off tattooing and how inaccessible it was to me, and would remain for a very long time, as well as my plummeting follower count, I had dedicated my attention to an illustration-only Instagram, where I followed a new batch of illustrators largely focused on kidlit, my newest and strongest fixation. Many of them worked in combinations of watercolor, colored pencil, and gouache, and their meticulously filmed videos and beautifully photographed progress shots had enraptured me with their texture and color play. As soon as I tried colored pencil over watercolor, I knew I had finally found my medium. Process. With it, I could play with texture and detail while avoiding the over-rendering, uncanny valley between realism and cartoonish style I had grown prone to with media like oils or digital. For the first time in a long time, I felt excited by the direction my art was taking me and felt that I could express many different moods, from ethereal to horrifying, silly to serious. I leapt into my work with newfound excitement and filled 3 sketchbooks in a little over a year. As I grew more confident, I was slowly able to add other media back in. Gouache or marker could stand in for watercolor or add final pops of color on top of colored pencil. I could layer my watercolor textures into my digital work or plan digitally for a traditional painting. I applied to jobs, agents, publishing houses, and zines, and watched the rejection roll in. It was still, I learned, not enough. More work would need to be done to bring my portfolio up to professional snuff. No one cared about my many digital celebrity projects. If the style I wanted to work in had changed, my portfolio would need a complete and total overhaul, and no amount of past good work would prove I could do this new work in the future. Art directors no longer want that all-important versatility my professors with their postcards had so insisted upon. Well, of course, they wanted to see plants and animals, faces and clothes and buildings, but they wanted one style, your style, as clear and pure and distinct as possible. People buying art, it turns out, want to know ahead of time what exact look they're paying for. And if they're hiring you for you, as you, credited and named with royalties attached, and not as one of endless unnamed creatives churned into the machine of one singer's personal brand, well then yours must be the personal brand that impresses them. So yes, you need a style. Ideally, you need to have had a style for the past decade, an audience who has watched you grow into that style and likes it and likes you for your personality, which you should be good at showing in a cool, funny, relatable, mysterious, approachable way. In talking about one of my favorite internet artists/personalities, a friend said, "Oh, them? It's their world. We're all just living in it." That enviable coolness, the sense of self so potent it informs not just your art, but your personal aesthetic, environment, words, moods, pets, daily chores, boba order, and the sound effect you play when you leave that perfectly funny outtake in your video. You also need personal space, and sunlight, and enough time to film yourself enjoying both. If you're unconventional looking, you have to be as perfectly curated and polished as possible. No half measures for you. And if you are autistic, ADHD, or any other number of brain shapes that make people who dislike you insist it's not that they're, discriminating, you're just so weird, well, better have some very cool and monetizable quirks. Being hot doesn't hurt either. If you have all these things and that all-important audience who enjoys them in a numerically significant way, then jobs and agents and prestigious tattoo shops and sponsorships and conventions will find you. This is, of course, no guarantee you want all the jobs offered you, nor that whatever attention you get will keep your bills paid, but it is almost certain that you will be doing better than you would without. In this way, having an artist identity becomes a necessity for your job. This means it is imperative you find it, curate it, display it well, and often. Post often and consistently, say people whose job it is to help you attain niche internet microstardom. You have to be authentic and relatable to your audience. Your content should offer them something of value. Producing many, many valuable posts is imperative to having a career in art, and each should come with a story that your audience can relate to, but not be oversharing, not be too much. When you are autistic, being too much is the all too common death knell of any attempted social interaction. When you're autistic, and everyone who is supposed to guide you artistically has emphasized collecting as many useful for others skills as you can, because having style is limiting to how a client might make use of you, you may find yourself in your mid to late 20s with the sinking realization that you have not had a real sense of creative identity since you were a Tumblr teen posting cringy Batman fan art. Eventually, the time came to return home with my spouse, back to my home state and tattooing. I realized many of the pieces I had made for practice would, with few tweaks, make good tattoos. I made them into Flash. I made more Flash in that style. People booked those tattoos, and I liked the results. A year of not tattooing had eaten a large dent into my clientele and my online presence, and as the incoming rush of backlog clients slowed, new clients were less and less forthcoming. A recession and corporate price gouging ate into people's wallets, and I no longer frequented bars or drink-and-draws or gallery openings. In a private studio at last, I had control of my time and clients and money in ways I'd never had before, but no date-night sweethearts came to pick Flash from my books or carry my stickers off to show their friends. The desperation set back in. Make Flash, make illustrations, feel guilty not working hard enough on tattoos, feel guilty not working hard enough on art career. I liked this a year ago and now I don't anymore. A friend who said it was good when it was made says it's a bit too flat and stale now. Best to replace it. Make something good. Make something good. Don't you know what you want to make? Don't you know what you like? Don't you know who you are? For a long time I've debated making a video like this. I've made TikToks the past year, an easier format where I don't need to have access to a space to film, don't need the time to write my thoughts, record them in the quiet night when no one is moving around my house. They're shorter, snappier. They limit my obviously overabundant ramblings into attempts at charismatic sound bites. I delete them often. I can never say it right. It feels like the wrong kind of authenticity, a vulnerability without a triumphant but at the end that gives the relief of a solution. I've only just began speaking publicly about my experiences on the autism spectrum. I know, because people have told me, that it makes me less likable. Likability in the online world is a powerful currency, and to speak on topics like this, especially to speak critically of my career, which I know many people do not have the privilege to pursue, is a gamble. But for a long time I've bit back the question, how do you create an identity for yourself that you like when you are told so much that identity as an artist is a commodity to prune and perfect until an audience of strangers buys it? When as a neurodivergent AFAB, you have been told you must adjust yourself for others, and all of your educators have told you style is a privilege you earn through hard work. Where do you find the drive to make a lot of work? Doesn't matter if it's messy, you don't have to post it, as all the advice says. If in the same listicle, you should also post as often and as authentically as you can. When one underperforming post tells an algorithm your authenticity is, quote, low quality, so your reach dips for a week, and you know filling your winter cancellation slots is relying on someone, something, finding your work, valuable. There's so much pressure to give in to the capitalistic parasocial nightmare, and more charismatic and consistent creators have made great points about what it does to you as a creator and a person. But always from the perspective of someone whose style is there, consistent and curated and no doubt exhausting, but there. I know only a handful of artists whom I would consider very talented, but too inconsistent to show it well online. I know they float around out there in the real world, but frankly I haven't seen much of that place since winter of 2020. And as I sit here recording this, recovering from my second round of COVID in 12 months, both times given to me by the same person who I live with, I find it hard to imagine a future where I'm once again out in crowds and bars and events. In my isolation, I, like many, turn to those parasocial relationships that pay and drain us, and I compare myself to other artists and think, how did you become so much yourself? Thanks for watching and listening to this odd little ramble. I know this isn't the story social media gurus advise I tell, and it may not be one many people can relate to, but it is, if nothing else, authentic, for whatever value I, or my audience, or the proto-Rogos basilisk marinating in the YouTube algorithm assigns it. All of my links and such are in the description if you want to be parasocial with me. Until next time.